Testing, mic test. Hello everyone. Welcome to the React workshop. Just a little mic check here, mic check. All right, so so welcome to the React workshop by SES in collaboration with Autodesk. First of all, I want to thank you for attending this. These are really challenging times. It's really a lot of uncertainty and unrest in the world right now, and I don't know about you, but I found it's very exhausting to work from home all the time, and I can't imagine even harder studying. I can imagine studying at home must be even harder. All the distractions at your disposal. So some of you may have exams right now or soon. So and you're here today and you're taking the time to really invest in yourself and learn something new. So really, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. A few reminders. I'm gonna send the Notion link on Slack so we could start there. So make sure you're in Slack. You should have received the link before. So I'm gonna send. All right. So make sure you're in the general channel on Slack. So I just posted it right there. If you're in Slack, I'm also gonna paste it on YouTube just in case. If ever you didn't get the Slack link, so all right, sorry, it doesn't really highlight the link, but I sent it on YouTube as well. And just in case, here's the Slack link. I'm gonna send it on YouTube as well. Just for those who are just joining us now. Yeah, all right. So we're ready to go. So let me just minimize myself here so you can see the bigger browser. So what you see here is the material. It's in a web app called Notion. It's like a document system that you can share, and it supports Markdown. So this is the material that we're going to be looking at. I'm going to start here, but if ever you get lost in the whole material, there's a lot of materials, a lot of sub documents. You could just click here on the top left, so you could go back to this homepage. All right, so gonna start with this one. Right, so I didn't introduce myself yet, so now I will do that. I'm Lenny. Hello. I'm a web developer at Autodesk on the Shotgun team. I graduated at Concordia University in Montreal with a concentration in web services and application. And I'm saying that because some of you might be from Concordia, because it's through SES after all. So I used to attend SES workshops before to myself, and yeah, it's pretty cool that I get the chance to do this now. I'm also a mentor, so reach out later if ever you want to get into mentorship. I'm currently mentoring 2 students right now, so it might be a little tight, but still message me. That's my old laptop with all the stickers. I used to go to hackathons a lot. Those are quite older though, but you might recognize some of them. That's me at Hack the North. These are some of my socials. That's my blog. Follow me on Twitter if you have Twitter, because I post usually my projects, things that I'm working on in React and other things, and things that I do in open source. That's my GitHub. You could also see my open source stuff there. There's my Gmail. That's my Devtools account, and LinkedIn. Also, just a little heads up. There's a little delay from my machine to YouTube, so if in case there's anything that you ask me or something, I might only read it after. So there's a delay, and try to keep your stream around 720p or higher if you can, because if it's lower than that, you might not see the text very well. And also let me know after if the font is too small. Let me just see my Slack. Let me just figure something. It's giving. All right. Anyways, it's All right. So before the workshop, so you've seen this document before. It was sent along with the registration. So make sure you have Slack, Git, and GitHub. I hope you got a chance to become familiar with Code Sandbox, because we're gonna be using that throughout the workshop. And also, knowledge of web stuff is not required, but it would really help if you know it. But if you don't know HTML, if you haven't touched web or HTML or JavaScript at all, I would just ask you to just take a leap of faith and hang in there and try to focus on the on the what and the why, rather than the how. The implementation would come after, but hopefully you're gonna see some concepts here that would inspire you to learn this. But if you have no idea of HTML or JavaScript, it's totally fine. But just try to focus on the concepts, because a lot of them are transferable also to the other computer science things. This is what you're gonna learn, so I'm gonna skip that. So just a little plug for Autodesk, where I work. If some of you probably already know Autodesk, but for those who don't, Autodesk already existed for around 30 years, and in Montreal we have an office. We developed Maya, 3ds Max, Flame, Arnold, and Shotgun there. AutoCAD is also from Autodesk, and from the last Oscar or Academy Awards, these software from Autodesk were used by the nominees. So I could just tell you that most of the studios, or a lot of the studios of movies and games, use Shotgun and these other software. If you play AAA games, the studios that brings you those games are also some of them are also using Shotgun. If you know Game of Thrones, the studios that bring you Game of Thrones also use Shotgun, some of them, and that's our website, shotgunsoftware.com, and it's a web app actually. So I'm part of that team that develops this web app that allows collaboration between artists and producers, and allows you to track assets, the shots from a movie and things like that. So yeah, we use some React in the front end, and we use Rails in the back end. Yeah, so that's just a little plug. If you have questions about Autodesk or Shotgun, let me know after. The approximate length, it's going to be around 3 hours, so it's supposed to finish around 8:30. Yeah, so workshop introduction. So yeah, I want to start this workshop by just kind of reviewing why we're doing this. Why is it important? It's really good to kind of get that out of the way, to make sure that we're that we really know what we're doing, and that it's important. Let me just switch my screen here. Okay, cool. So that's a bit bigger. So first thing is, what is a web app? You might have heard of this term before. It might not be completely clear, because there's a concept also of a website. So a website, you can think of it as more static. There's not really a lot of interactivity. If you're in Concordia, your professors would give you a link with the material, the assignments. Most of the time, their websites, it's just basically a collection of documents with links. You would be lucky if there's pictures in there. So that's a website. It's more static. And web app, on the other hand, it's more dynamic. So you have a lot of interactivity. You have a lot of more dynamic stuff going on, from messaging, authentication, graphs, all sorts of interactivity and customization that the user can do. You could also think of desktop tools that are back then, or traditionally desktop based. Now they're becoming web based, like Slack, for example. You could run this in your browser, so that's a web app. Or Microsoft Word, Microsoft Office. Before, traditionally you would only have that in your desktop, but now you could run it in your browser. And same goes also with with a lot of these software from Autodesk. Actually, some of them you could actually use them on the web. So now we're kind of transforming to this mode that everything can be run in your browser. Even games, you could play something in your browser. So it created more kind of demand for more resources, and more kind of like, we need a better way to do this, to do web apps. And the next question is, why would you use front-end frameworks or libraries? If you've done JavaScript before, like vanilla JavaScript or PHP or just plain HTML, you might have done something like this. So you might have done something like this. You would have so to implement a to-do list, you would have a query selector here, and if I type here and I add, you would kind of do it manually here to create a new item, and then you have to re-render the whole list using query selectors and inner HTML. So here we're kind of imperatively or more manually manipulating the HTML elements. So the whole point of front-end frameworks like React, Angular, and Vue is that to make it more easy, to make it more declarative, to make it more data-driven, so that instead of you manually adding items here in your list, especially here, the point that I want to emphasize here is that every time you add something, you'd have to re-render the whole list. So that's also not very efficient. So the whole point of these front-end frameworks is that once you're using data-driven components, whenever the data changes, the view would automatically update. So here you would just have a list of items, and whenever it changes for some reason, maybe you added an item, it would just kind of just magically update itself without you manually manipulating the elements. So it's more declarative. And the key word there is data-driven components. We want it to be in a way that we have data, and whenever that data updates, the UI automatically updates. So these are some companies that uses React. I'm not gonna go into the discussion whether React is better, or Angular is better, or Vue is better, but just an FYI, those are the companies that uses React. Both are very good solutions. But yeah, so it's good to know, most of them if you can. But I'll be a bit biased to because this is a React workshop. So yeah. So, and the another thing that I want to say is that a lot of the concepts here that you would learn is not just for React. A lot of this would kind of apply to the bigger scheme of front-end development, state management. That a lot of it can even apply in vanilla JavaScript or other libraries and frameworks. So if you're attending this, don't just think that it's just for React. I mean, when we get to the implementation part, but the concepts of state and data-driven components, that's applicable to all the other libraries too. Code Sandbox, I want to give a little introduction to this. So this is what we're gonna use. Actually, I've showed this before. Sorry if I didn't explain that before. So this is Code Sandbox. It's a platform that allows you to code without setting anything up. You just open a link, it runs already. You have a browser preview here. You can modify the files here. So it's really a lot easier, and it's very easy to share. You just copy paste the link and give it to someone, and they can fork it to create their own version. So it's very easy. Instead of you installing all of these things, npm, webpack, React, you don't have to do that. It's all in here, so you can focus on the content. So files are here on this side. You can traverse that directory. You could click and then edit. That's your code editor. There's also a console log here. If ever you have a console log in your code, it's gonna go in this thing. So you can close that, and that's your preview browser. The most important thing is if you haven't done it yet, make sure you sign in with GitHub. That's why I asked everyone to sign up with GitHub on the preview document, so that's whatever you do in this workshop, it's gonna go in your dashboard, and you can come back to it later. If you're not signed in, you just lose it once you close this. So make sure you sign in so you could continue working it after. Maybe you could make it your personal project. You could put it in your CV at some point if you make the project big enough and understand everything in there. Yeah, so there's gonna be some snippets. So watch out for those little links in the workshop, because that would take you to a sandbox. Keyboard shortcuts, we're not gonna need that for now. So Notion, that's what you're viewing right now. As I said, if ever you get lost, you could use these things on the top to go back to the home page. About the material, there's no rush. We have a few we have like around 5 or 6 chapters, but we would go as to as much as we can cover. There's no rush to finish all of them, but it's ordered in a way that it builds up on top of the other. So it's really important that we go from chapter 1 and then the next one. So try to not get overwhelmed in the details. Like I said before, if you've never done any of this before, if you've never done JavaScript or HTML, or maybe you've never done programming before even, don't worry, just try to take a leap of faith and just try to focus on kind of getting inspired on what you can do with this and the very high level concepts that you're gonna learn. Yeah, and I'm gonna give you an activity or break at the end of every chapter, around 10 to 15 minutes, I would say, depending on the time that we have. So use that time to go back to the material, review it, try the challenges. I would put challenge. I'm gonna give you time to try the challenges in the chapters and ask for questions. Ask the question in Slack compared to YouTube, because I would watch the Slack more than the YouTube chat, so I might have a delay on replying to YouTube questions. So yeah, don't be shy. Ask questions and get help. The nice thing with this online platform right now is that if some of you are kind of shy to ask questions, now you don't have to be. It's all in Slack. We're not gonna see you or anything. It's all in Slack. It's not like you're raising your hand and we're in front of a classroom. So fire ahead if you have any question. All right. So and yeah, at the end there's a survey. So I'm gonna put the survey link there a little bit after. So if you have to leave early for some reason, I understand. It's probably a long night for you, but please do the survey before you leave. I'm gonna put the link of the survey after. All right, so we're gonna start with the first chapter. Let's see. I think we have some questions. Yeah. So there's a question on how we could use React locally. I could discuss that a bit later, and kind of give you a guide. But basically, you would need Node on your machine, and you would need npm. But actually, the easiest way is to use create React app. So this is if you're not gonna do code Sandbox, this is probably the easiest one. Yeah. So let me just type it there. All right. So we're gonna start with JSX and rendering elements. Let me just check the notes. All right. So we have here some JSX code. So we have an import here, we have another import here, and so import is just us using the library. So in terms of React, we have to import React and on React DOM also. And here, the way we're doing it in JavaScript is we have to import the styles. So if you're used to more, where was my, yeah, if you're used to more HTML, then your CSS would be kind of in a link. But in React, you could import styles just like that. But the biggest question here is this thing, what is this? It looks weird, right? Especially if you haven't seen this before. So this is HTML and this is JavaScript because we're assigning it to a variable. So we're basically combining HTML with JavaScript. So that is the whole point of React, actually, is to finally combine HTML and JavaScript. The React team thought that HTML or the UI or whatever you see on a web page, it goes hand in hand. It belongs together with the logic, which is the JavaScript. So just put it together. So basically, JavaScript is JavaScript. JSX is just JavaScript plus HTML. So you could kind of see this as a comparison if you've done PHP or JSP or ASP or languages like that you can embed variables in your HTML. So let me see, I think I have a sample here. So yeah, so if you've done PHP before, you could do stuff like that, right? So you have HTML, you could output the variable there, so it would be evaluated in the page. But JSX is kind of the other way around. It's like putting HTML in your JavaScript, because this is a JavaScript file after all. So yeah, just keep that in mind. A little intro here, if in case you're seeing const for the first time. Const is the newer version of var. Const and let, we're gonna see that a lot. The difference with const and let is their block scope. So block scope meaning they're limited to their scope inside opening and closing brackets. Compared to var before, it's more global, so it leaks out of blocks. Const is contained here. So in this example, const is limited to this because it's inside a block, and outside of that, x is back to 10 because var is global. So anyways, that's just a little intro to const and let. So you can embed expressions in JSX. So you have a variable here. That's a variable declaration. We're declaring a variable name. We're setting it to a string world. In JavaScript also, there's no types. So if you're more used to Java, maybe you would have declared string world or something. In JavaScript, there's no types. So you could just assign anything to anything. So that's a variable declaration. And here's another variable declaration. But in this case, we're not assigning just a regular string or a regular number. Here we're assigning HTML, or in this case, it's JSX. We're assigning JSX here because it's HTML, but we're embedding variables inside. So you could probably guess the result of this, right? So the variable is there, we're evaluating it there, and then here is just a regular, this is just an expression. So you can imagine the result of that is hello world bar 2. When evaluating variables, make sure you enclose it with opening and closing brackets. So that's like a signal to React that, hey, this is a variable, don't take it literally. And because because you can put expressions, you can also put function returns. So you have another one here where opening and closing this whole expression here, format user info. So the result of this function, whatever the result is, it will be evaluated here. So in this case, it's a bit more complex, this example, because we're using an object. And if it's the first time that you're seeing an object in JavaScript, it's basically a key value pair. So you have another variable here, and like I said before, there's no types in JavaScript. Anything can be assigned to anything. So this is an object enclosed in brackets, and this is a key value pair. So name equals Lenny, email equals lemurldlive.com, separated by comma. So this is like it's an object, or in Python I think it's called a dictionary, or in Java this is a hash map. So that's an object. That's an object in JavaScript. So what we're doing is we're passing that object into the function, and then that function would just concatenate the two properties of that object, which is name and email. And we do that by traversing the contents of that object, the properties of that object, which is name. We use the dot to access that. So user dot name, user dot email, and these are just string concatenations. We use plus to do that, right? So the result is the result would be by Lenny lemurld@live.com. Yeah, so let's see that example here. Right, so that's our object. We're embedding it there, right? And like I said, it's you can put any expressions as long as you enclose it with opening and closing brackets. So here I can put 10 times 10. So it's 100 there. So here you could do anything as long as you enclose it. And the ones that are not enclosed, well, they're considered like literals. They would be just displayed like that. And also sometimes when you're using code Sandbox, if it doesn't reflect your changes after saving the file, just hit this thing, the refresh button. Sometimes it needs to be manually triggered. Oh, and another thing, when you open the Sandbox, because most of them are frozen, so whenever you do a save, it's gonna be forked. So you're gonna get a different version. So don't worry about modifying it. You're not modifying my version. As soon as you hit save, it's gonna go to your account. As long as you're logged into Sandbox. All right. So since it's an expression, we could also group them together and put them like that. We could put them adjacent to each other, and we're gonna discuss the render after. But what I wanted to show here is that we assign them to variables here. So we assign the JSX to variables. So here, that's our first variable. This is our second variable. And then we can choose to only evaluate that after combining them. Just make sure that you enclose them with brackets, and that's it. They get evaluated. So you can think about this part as, as like I said, it's like HTML. You could just evaluate stuff. All right, I hope that's clear, because it's gonna get a bit complicated fast. So yeah, anyways, if you have any questions, just ask. All right, so because it's expressions, we could do something like this. You can return JSX from a function. So here we have this, actually I'm just gonna open the file. It's gonna be a bit nicer. Right here, so you have this JSX again, and you're evaluating the result of this function. You're calling the function get forecast. You're passing the temperature. It's hard coded right now, but it's actually not like -1 right now. It's actually warmer than that. But so what happens here is if temperature is less than 0, you return this HTML with an emoji of a snowflake, and if not, you return an emoji of a sun. So in this case, because it's hard coded -1, we get like this one, snowflake. So the whole thing that I want to show here is that you can return JSX from a function too. So you can think about it as like an expression, a value. You can do all sorts of manipulation with it. All right, we're gonna go into styling. So if you've done CSS before, styling can look like this. If you're using inline styles, so you have a string, they're separated by semicolons. Each of the properties is using a colon. So background color, that's a CSS property. Colon red, that's the value that you want the CSS property to be. Font size 12. That's in HTML, but in JSX, because it's JavaScript after all, you have to use objects. So in this case, if you're gonna do inline style, you have to do this notation, which is kind of looks weird since there's 2 brackets in there. The 2 brackets actually means like this. So the inner bracket is for the object. So like I showed you before, key value pairs. So this is the key value pairs of your CSS properties, and each key has to be camel cased instead of that one, the one with the dash. I think they call it kebab case. So it has to be camel cased, and you separate them by comma instead of semicolon. So take note of that. So that's your object, and then you have to have it evaluated by React, right? So you have to enclose it in another bracket so that it knows that you're passing something that you want it to be evaluated. Hence the double brackets. So yeah. So in cases where you want a value to be evaluated, but it's a JavaScript object, you have to pass. Yeah. Well, you're gonna see 2 brackets. But if you're just evaluating, like in this case, it's just a value. It's not a JavaScript object. Then you just use 1. Right? We're gonna see more of this in the examples. Another thing is that you use class name instead of class. So in regular CSS, you do class equals style, right? Because usually you would have a style sheet. And then that style sheet would have a title with some styles on it. But in JSX you use class name instead, because class is a reserved word in JavaScript. So putting all of that together, it's a big thing, but it's just a lot of examples. But the base theory is there. So actually I want to show that you have the styles here. So if you've done CSS, this looks familiar. So we are importing that CSS in our JavaScript index.js. We're importing that there. So here we just have a little image, and we're using that image in an image element. So this is an HTML element that you use to display an image. So here we just pass the image URL in the source. So again, since this is a variable that we want to be evaluated, we have to use the brackets. We're passing class name just to have it styled and the sizing and stuff like that. Another example is like we've seen before. If you're passing inline styles, you have to pass it with double brackets, since that's an object and you want it to be evaluated. If you're doing it more organized, say like this one, it's the same thing. So you could just take that out and then put it outside in a variable. So now it's more clear, right? So now you could put that in a variable, and then you could just use it just like that. So it's a little clearer. But if I take this thing, cut, paste, you know, it's the same thing. You add the double bracket. So this kind of makes it clearer that we're just doing a shortcut. We're saving a variable basically. Instead of declaring a variable, we're putting that directly there. And class name, if you have a class like that. And here, once we collected all of our elements, we could put it in our JSX. Make sure you evaluate them. And yeah, so we get that little thing there. Let's say we put it twice. It's gonna happen. Okay, so we put it twice. See, we get double. Yeah, so that's for the styling. There's a few rules that we have to follow when doing JSX. So you can't have something like this. So you have three adjacent elements that are siblings without a parent. React's gonna complain if you have something like that actually. So let's say I remove the div here. We're gonna get an error. So you can see that I have two siblings here, right? They don't have a parent. Yeah, so I get that error. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So you always need a parent that would hold it. And this is not new. If you've done HTML, this is the structure of HTML. It's a tree, and it's a hierarchy of elements, and you always have a parent to child structure. So you have to enclose it like that. So that's a solution for that. And how do you write a comment? You just enclose it with the braces and /* ***. I know it's a bit tedious, but if you're using VS Code, which is integrated automatically with Code Sandbox, you could that's actually kind of provided for you. So I could just do command / to do that, which is kind of neat. The last thing I want to discuss with this chapter is the rendering part. So far I've discussed styling, I've discussed evaluating your JSX inside another JSX, evaluating variables, but how do we actually put it in our web page? How do we actually make it appear on the screen? So what the magic that makes it appear on the screen is this part, right? If I remove this part, we're not going to see anything. Yeah, see, there's nothing. There's nothing. It's a blank screen because we didn't put anything in the screen. So what does the magic is the React DOM.render, and the syntax is that React DOM.render whatever JSX you want to put on the screen. In this case, it's the container. And the second argument is where do you want to put it? So in this case, we're putting it in an element with ID root. We're using JavaScript syntax get element by ID. So if you look at our HTML, in Code Sandbox, your HTML is in your public folder. They already put a lot of kind of like boilerplate code, but what we really need is this one. So you have a div with an ID equals root. So we're referencing that from our JavaScript. So what happens is if we do this, React's gonna mount the technical term is mount. React's gonna mount this component or this JSX into this HTML element. So it's gonna go inside. So that's how you render. And usually you only have to call it once for your entire application because it's a tree anyways, right? So if you have a React app, you would have it in one hierarchy, but you're just gonna have a lot of child and grandchild elements, things like that. You're gonna see that later, but usually you'd only have to call render once. Yeah. Oh, and there's also conditional rendering. It's more like a shortcut. Once again, since this is an expression, right? JSX is an expression. It's not regular HTML. It's an expression. So you can do something like this. So just imagine that you have this wish list widget or something that if you have items in the wish list, you want to display this thing. But if there's nothing in the wish list, then you don't want to display it at all. So that's what it's doing. So we're using the inline if or double ampersand such that whenever this condition is true, so if items length is more than 0, that means you have something in your items array. If this is true, then this is gonna display whatever this JSX is. And if it's not true, then it's not even gonna do anything. It's gonna exit. It's gonna exit and just display the other stuff. And then again, since this is an expression, make sure you enclose that with opening and closing braces. Lastly, we have a ternary operator. This is also a concept in most languages. So I think you're familiar with this. I think they have this in Java or in Python as well. So once again, you have to enclose it in braces since it's an expression. So if you have more than one item in your wish list or items.length is greater than 1, then that's the condition. So if true, display this, and if false, display this one. So make sure you separate them with a colon. So that's a ternary. So condition, if true, do this. If false, do this. Right, so you can see that little example here. And actually get familiar with this example because that's what you're gonna do in the activities. All right, so here we are in the activity. So just to remind you about code Sandbox, make sure that you signed in, so you keep your work. So as soon as you hit save here, it's gonna fork it. See, it says fork. And the other thing is you could actually rename it. So you could rename it to something that makes sense to you, so you can come back to it after. So I could put Lenny version 1 or something like that, and it's gonna be saved in your dashboard later, so you can continue working on it. Right? Where's that? This one? Yeah, I think that's the one. Yeah. So yeah. So I'm gonna give you 10 minutes for this one. It's a lot of items, but you know, just do as much as you can. I'm giving you 10 minutes. It's not a lot, but we have a lot of material to cover, so I just want to make sure that we will have enough time. But yeah, so I'm gonna give you 10 minutes. And if you have any questions about the activity itself, ask me on Slack. But I want this activity to kind of like be self-descriptive as much as possible. But yeah, so have fun. I'm gonna see you in around 10 minutes. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I probably forgot to mention. But yeah, so the link is this one. So usually during the activities, I would provide a link in the beginning. So so for this activity, it's this one right here. So what you would do is you would just you would click this and you would hit fork, right? So you have your own version, and then you just start working on it. And if you want to see the solutions right away, but I discourage you from looking at the solutions right away. Try to really kind of think about it for your own first. The solutions are right here. So, all right, enjoy. All right, welcome back. Someone asked Stefano about the folder file structure. Yeah, sorry I didn't really discuss that correctly before. Let's do that right now. So the thing is, since we're using code Sandbox, we're not really gonna see a full React folder or file structure, like let's say what we use at work, because there you're gonna see Webpack, you're gonna see Babel, you're gonna see ESLint for linting and things like that, Jest for the test. This is really more minimal, so we don't really see anything. But you know, that's the thing. It's all taken care of by Code Sandbox in the background. It uses Parcel, so if you want to check it out, check out Parcel.js. It uses Parcel instead of Webpack, so it's more minimal. But here we have this. We have our JavaScript here, where we put our component, our React component, and the render. And later on, we're gonna create more files here. But the main idea is that we have a mount point here. Here's our mount point that connects our React app into our HTML. So make sure you have that. And from there, you could just import things, like let's say you have 5 other components. As long as you can put them here, component 1, component 2. But as long as you have a mount point, you should be good. And here you have styles. So yeah, there's not much really of a folder file structure. But if you want to see like a React project in production, then you would look at more like something like Create React app. So yeah, so let me discuss the solutions quickly. Let me put that there. All right, so in the exercise, I ask you to change the inline styles for the div with the container. So this one, so that's the inline styles that you would need there. Number 2, set the styles of the header to header style. So it's that one. So that one's already declared here. You just have to put that in here and make sure you evaluate it with the braces. We have a CSS class title. So that one, just we have to put class name. And for the ternary, I wouldn't discuss the bonus, but the ternary part in number 4, you have to use a ternary operator. So if messages is greater than 1, if this is true, so you display this. So you use a concatenation, the number of messages plus the message, and if it's not more than 1, then you put message. And if you're able to do the bonus, then that means you probably understand this part. So I don't think I have to discuss that one. There's a few more things, the inline if and the chat. So that's an inline if. If wants to chat, you want to display that chat button right there. Yeah, sorry. And yeah, so yeah, it looks a little bit like Facebook. So don't tell them, they're gonna sue me. Yeah. Jokes aside, yeah, it's don't worry about the CSS too much. If you have questions on the CSS part, you could ask me after the workshop. And by the way, I'm planning to stay around 15 to 30 minutes after the workshop. So from 8:30 to 9, depending if someone would actually stay and ask questions. So if ever some of you might want to discuss something else, or if you're really catching up and you wanna talk. All right, so we're gonna continue with the next chapter, components. All right, so yeah, for the questions, if I don't get a chance to answer them during the workshop, I'm gonna answer them on the activity, I promise. All right, so components and props. So now we've seen how you do JSX, how you write JSX, combination of JavaScript and HTML. How do we organize our code? Where do we put our code? So that's the biggest question. So in most frameworks, even Angular has this concept. It's a front-end framework thing. A component. So a component is a reusable self-contained code that contains rendering logic and JSX. So for React, a component is something that, like we've seen before, you know, we have this oops, sit down. Yeah, so we have this file that has some logic and some JSX. So that's it. So this can be a component. And the whole point of components is to organize your codes into different reusable pieces and self-contained pieces, so that you would tackle your development from the bottom up. So compared to before, if you did web development before or websites or even WordPress, you would tackle more like pages, right? You write your whole page and you write another page. So it's kind of a challenge when you want to share functionality or UI between those two pages. So what happened when we start to have these frameworks is that now we have a concept of components, so that you start to build components, and then you start to build from those components, and then from those components you build pages. These ones are actually a really good resource, component-driven development. So you can think of a component like a Lego piece, like a Lego. You know, it's one tiny little humble Lego. It doesn't do anything by itself. But if you combine a lot of Legos, then you could do something like that, or even bigger. You've seen those really Lego compositions that looks like that can fill a whole house, probably. So that's the whole concept. You build one component at a time. You combine components, and then you start to have pages and integrate pages into your project. So components is like your self-contained reusable code, and in React, that is your JSX, and we're gonna add some logic into your JSX, so we could officially call them components. So a little kind of reality check here, a case study. So let's just see, because Airbnb uses React, Uber Eats also uses React. So we could actually look at it and see, kind of just an exercise. If you use Uber Eats, you probably use Airbnb or you know, all of these apps. They kind of have a kind of familiar structure. So you start to look here. You know, you have a lot of things going on, right? But the challenge is for you to kind of find components in these views, like so if I ask you, can you spot the components in this page? So it might be challenging, right? Because, well, this whole thing could be a component, right? And you're right, it is a component. And this little thing, this little card would be a component, and you're right, that's also a component. But the whole thing here is that every little piece is like a component also. You could think about it as atoms too. Like that little heart right there, that when you click it, oh, sorry, I'm not signing. If you click that, you know, that's a component too. And this card is also a component that is composed of different components. Like you have a navigator there, you have that button there. And then once you have a combination of these components, then you have this nice scrollable view of items. And then you combine that with the header, and then you have like a whole page, right? So all of these little things are components. So keep that in mind, because we're gonna be building our own components in this workshop also. Yeah, so that's definitely a component. And just kind of a nice exercise. If you're using Chrome, or also when you're using Firefox, you could install an extension called the React Devtools. And the nice thing is that you could go to your develop DevTools, right-click inspect, or you could do F12, and you're gonna have this option components. As long as you're browsing a website, any website that uses React, you can see these options, and you can actually see the components. See, That's a component. We didn't discuss these things yet, props and stuff like that, but that's a component. And that bigger thing is a component too. Like this whole, okay, that heart is a component too, see? And then you could take the whole page, like maybe like this whole header, that's also a component. So that's a nice exercise. And this actually useful. We actually use this at work to like debug stuff. It's a really useful tool. So anyways, that's just a side note. So Es6 arrow functions, we're gonna see a lot of arrow functions here. So I want to get this out of the way, because if you've done JavaScript before, maybe around 5 years ago or earlier than that, you might be using this more like the traditional syntax. We still use the traditional syntax, although there's been a new syntax that was floating around in the last few years when ES6 came around, which is the new version of JavaScript. There's even an ES8, ES9, ES10 now, so it's moving very fast, the language. So it looks like this. So you use an arrow. So the conversion goes like this. So you have this regular function. It's either this one or this one. They're both, you know, ES5 versions. So in your ES6 version for this one, you're gonna have you're not gonna have the function keyword anymore, but you still keep your parameters, right? So you lose the function keyword, and in between the parameters and the block, you put an arrow, which is just equals and greater than sign. And that's it. So you could kind of think about it like that. It looks strange, but if you think about it like that, it's just, you can kind of convert it in your head. You remove the function keyword, you add something in between, and that's it. It gets tricky when you use shorthands. So let's say you had this function like that returns, you know, it just multiplies it by 2, this function. You could make it ES6 like this. So you remove the function, you put the arrow in between. Okay, still looks different. But the thing is, you could actually use shorthands, and you're gonna see this a lot. That's why I want to expose this now, so when you see them, you don't get confused when you browse codes online. You could have a shorthand that you don't need the return if you only have one line. So in this case, we only have one line of code, so you don't need the return. You could have an implicit return here. And lastly, you don't need the parentheses if you only have one argument to this function. So in this case, that function became this one line, right? So just keep that in mind if ever you see that. You could go back to this guide later. So we're gonna write our component. So just a nice mental model for a component that we're gonna use. It's like a function, you know, you have a function that receives arguments. So let's say you have a function like add function. Your add function receives 2 numbers, and then it returns you the sum of those 2 numbers. Same thing as with a component. A component could be seen as a function. So you get props. Here, props is the argument to your component, to your function, and it returns something. What it returns though, a component, a React component, is the JSX, or it could be another component. But in this case, let's just focus that it's JSX that it's returning. So input is the props, some arguments, some parameters, and the output is JSX. So in this case, you have a component named hello that accepts a name. And props here is an object. So remember those objects before? The one with a key value pair and stuff like that. So props is an object. So here we could access whatever's in the props, and if we're passing a key name, then we could use that here. So in this case, if you're passing this parameters name equals world, then that means your output would be hello world. There's another way of writing components, which is using class, but for this workshop we're going to focus on the function one. So props props is short for properties, and that's the input of your component. Like, think about it as a function. It's the input to your function. So in this case, it's kind of expressed differently. So this is how you would use a component. So here we have a component that receives props, and one of those props is name. So when we use that, this is how we use that component. We declare it like an HTML element with a opening a bracket there and a closing bracket, and it's usually self-closing. Self-closing, I mean, you probably used a BR component, a BR element before, right? A BR or image element in that manner. So they're like that, right? So they're like that. But as you go through your learning React, you could also have like a sandwich version, like a div like this. But anyways, right now, so you have a component. You use that component by passing the props that it needs. So in this case, we're passing name equals world. So that component can then get that prop using like we did before, since it's an object, so you could get that props.name and make sure you evaluate that with the braces. So the output is hello world. You could pass multiple props. So in this example, we could have had hello, name equals Lenny, location equals Montreal, and if that's the case, we would have another prop here that we're evaluating props.location. Don't I have a... Okay, yeah, sorry, I didn't have a sandbox for that one. Let me see this. Okay, okay, so we have this here. Don't mind the class component, we're gonna focus on the functional. So yeah, here, let's say I'm passing... So there's a lot going on here, but let me just comment the other stuff out. Right. Okay. Oops. All right, so like I said, we could add another one here. We could add another prop, Montreal, and make sure that if you pass another one, then you reference that here. Props.location, right? Cool. So just remember that when you're using the component, when you're rendering it, so the proper term is render. When you're rendering the component or you're including it in some JSX, you have to use the HTML attribute notation, which is equals. So here, name equals Lenny, location equals Montreal. It's kind of like the HTML, you know, you have style equals or source equals for image. But when you're declaring the component inside the definition of your component, you access the props by, you know, like as if it was an object, because you're receiving that here. So you use props.name, props.location. All right. So once you have something like that, you could just mix and match. You could combine things. So that's the whole example here. So you have three usage of this component, and you have another one here. Here we're declaring another component that itself is rendering the other component. So you can have something like a composition. So this is a component, and this component is inside this component, right? Actually, let's just use the, sorry, I put the class component there, but let's just use the functions right now. Let's use the functional component right now. So you have a component here, and you have another component here that is rendering that component using this. So we have three instances of that component in this component, and then finally we're rendering that component in another one. And finally, we're putting that in a screen using React Dom.render. So there's a hierarchy there. So I'm going to show you another example to kind of make it clear. I think this one would kind of drive it home. All right, so here we have four components. We have the first one, app, and inside app, we're rendering school. So app is rendering school, and school is rendering room, and room is rendering workshop. And how that looks like is in the definition of app, where we're using a school component and we're passing a prop. And inside the definition of that component, we're receiving that prop, and then we're receiving that prop, sorry, and then we're using that here, props.name, so that shows here School Concordia. And then it's also rendering another component, which is room. We're passing a room number, and that is another component. So that component, in turn, it receives another prop, and it renders that prop. And it's also rendering another component. And here we're passing two props, and that component receives those props and renders them. Right. So I hope that's clear. But I know it could really looks like messed up how it's composition like that. But always think about it in terms of a hierarchy. Like app is the parent of school. School is the parent of room. Room is the parent of workshop. We could even talk about grandparents and stuff like that, but in this case we can just go one level at a time. Yeah, so that is, so some guidelines when using components and props. Props are supposed to be immutable or read-only, so we can't do something like this. So let's say in your component that you're receiving props, you can't modify it. You can't say props.discount equals 75. I mean, you can do it, but then you're gonna receive a lot of errors and you're gonna have bugs in your code. Because first of all, it doesn't make sense. Just think about components as functions again. So yeah, you have like a really simple function here. You have a function add that receives two arguments, a and b, and it just returns a plus b. So it doesn't make sense for you to modify a, right? Because it's just an argument. So especially this one's a pure function. That's another topic, pure functions and functional programming. But this is a pure function, and it being a pure function, we have to make sure that we don't modify the arguments. So that's kind of the analogy. You know, it doesn't make sense. The only job of this function is to return the results of the addition of those two values, and it has to treat those arguments as read-only. If you want to change the value, you should change it from the parent, like this. So don't change it on the component. Change it from the one using the component, from the source. So here, we're changing it from the ones that is rendering banner. So we pass a different prop instead, and then inside the banner we just display it as is. You could also do something like this, like you could add something to the prop, or you could use it to render something else, but just don't modify it. Here we're not modifying it. We're not setting it to equal. We're just adding something to it. So I guess the keyword here is equals. Don't use some form of equals to change your props. So those are the rules. So we're gonna start looking at this project because I think it's gonna drive home some of the concepts here, especially for those of you who are not familiar with JavaScript. At least you can kind of see what you can do with this. Just a disclaimer that the CSS is not perfect. It's not modern CSS. It doesn't even look really good at all. But you know, CSS is just the styling and stuff. But so here I'd like you to focus on the actual functionalities of the function. So what you can do here is you have a theme switcher here. You could switch from light to dark, and you could search memes. Like you want to have 3 dogs, something like that. Right. I hope you like memes. And then you could favorite them. And if you favorite them, they would go to your library there, little library there. Yeah. So this is the final product. This is around chapter 6, so it's a long way to get there, but just to kind of show you what we're gonna work on. This is where we're gonna start. So right now, this is our initial project. There's nothing much new here. So we have our index JavaScript. That is our mount point, and we're rendering a component. So this is a little new, because before we're rendering JSX elements that are declared in a variable, but more often you're gonna see something like this. So to organize your code, you're gonna have a component. So app is our component here. It's declaring all of those things that should appear in the screen, and we're exporting it. And from our mount point, we import that component, and we render that component in our HTML. So that's one way of doing it. It's actually the more common way of doing it. So we're gonna look mostly on the app component here. So let me just, okay. So here we have a component app. We're using the arrow function syntax to get you used to it. So this component is returning this div, right? So this div contains a lot of things. It contains the header there. That's the header h1, and it's returning this container of memes. And inside the meme container, we had 3 memes. We have 1 meme, so that's that one. 2, that's that one, and 3, that's the third one. If you're wondering more on the layout and how did it look like that, how does it flow like evenly, that's Flexbox, but that's CSS, so I'm not gonna discuss that. But what I want you to know is that this is actually embeds from Giphy. So if you go to giphy.com, you could search for memes, and you could get their embed link, and you could put it in your website and things like that. So that's what I did here. So we have 3 memes. So right now it's mostly just HTML, right? So that's the thing. JSX is also HTML. We don't really need to put evaluated variables every time. We could just put HTML and assign it to and return it to our in our component, right? But you're gonna see later that we're gonna use variables there and stuff. But that's our initial component. It's all hard-coded for now. Yeah, so side note, the source there, the iframe. So yeah, here since we're not evaluating any variables, we can use double quotes. It's not a variable, it's hard-coded. Template literals, we're gonna use this after, so I want to show you this one. So before, the way to concatenate strings in JavaScript is using a plus. So you have, let's say, hello plus a space plus some variable, which is that one. So in ES6, which is the newer version of JavaScript, you could do something like this. So as long as you surround them with a backtick like that, you could evaluate variables, but you have to use a $sign and opening and closing brackets. This is just for strings. Don't confuse this with the other variables that we're inputting in the JSX before. This is just for string declarations. This is just JavaScript. It has nothing to do with JSX, but it's just a neat way to do that. Instead of you concatenating, you could just input it like that. But just remember the syntax is $sign and open close braces. So now we're gonna start thinking components. So if you look at this one, it's it's a nice component. It's one component actually, but it's like doing too much, right? And the biggest issue here, there's a lot of duplicated code. If you look at it closely, this is duplicated, this is duplicated, and for the third time it's duplicated. So the only difference here is that those meme IDs that we're using with the embed, so that's different, that's different, that's different, and the title. So title's different, title's different, title's different, but the other stuff are the same. So we want to modularize this. We want to make this in a way that we're not duplicating code, that we're calling like a function or something, so that we just pass these distinct parts and it would return us the same thing, right? So that's the function. That's the purpose of a component. We use props as the distinct parts, and the component returns the what we want to display, considering those distinct parts. So a guideline is a single responsibility principle. It's a programming thing too. It's a good idea in software development if to separate things. And if you're talking about components, it should ideally do only one thing. If it ends up growing, it should be decomposed into smaller subcomponents like this one. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna extract this part into its own component, and those are the guidelines. One component per file. So just another example here, going back to the Airbnb example. Like if this is your application, like does it make sense for all of these things to be in one component? Not really, right? It's probably gonna be like 3 million lines of code or something that your editor's just gonna break and freeze. So we want to separate. That's a different component, so it should be in its own file. So that's a different component, should be on its own file. And then we start composing them. So that's what we're gonna do. But here we're kind of gonna go backwards. We already have a big component like this, and we're gonna extract it, just to kind of show how you can go around it. So yeah, like I said, those things are the distinct parts. The ID of the meme, the title, and the title, other ones are just the same. So the distinct parts can be props, right? So that's the whole purpose of having a function, and in this case a component, to have to pass parameters, to have something generalized so that you could pass parameters to it, and the function returns what you need considering your past parameters. So we could build a component like this. So this is going to be in its own component, and we could use the props that we received, props.id and props.title. So those are going to be arguments. Those are going to be props passed to the component. And here it's more straightforward, right? We saw this before, props.title. That means when we use this component, we're going to say title equals, and we're going to say ID equals, like this. But the other thing is we're using a template literal syntax here. So instead of doing embed that plus this, so we're using the template literal. So we're using a backtick to put our props ID there, and since that's an expression, so remember the backtick notation of template literal, that's an expression too. So you have to enclose that in braces. And this is your complete component. So we call it a meme, your meme component. It's going to be in meme.jsx. And the way you use that from before is that instead of you declaring those iframes manually for 3 times, at least you have a shorter thing. You just have one line. So you have, oh, okay, render this meme. I'll give you the ID. I'll give you the title. and the meme returns to you this whole thing. And using props that it receives, it actually gets you something different every time. Props ID, props title, and it looks like that. I mean, nothing changes in terms of how it looks like, right? So yeah, so now we have our different component here. We're exporting that as a file, and in your app you import that, right? We have another example here, the menu project. So we're gonna be looking at two projects. One is the memes and one is the menu. Let me just close stuff here. So the menu project looks something like this. So this is a bit contrived, right? The example, usually if you have the static menu, you would do it in just plain HTML, but just to kind of really have a good example here that is not too complicated, so we're using this example. So here we're rendering a meal. So each meal is a component. So sorry, the meal is a component here, and each line that you see there, that's the result of one component. Same thing with the dessert part. That's another component right there. That's another component instance right there. And the way we're using that is like this. So we have the meal component, we're passing props to it, so it's different every time, and we're doing it 3 times, 1, 2, 3 for each of our item. And we have the dessert also. We have 3 desserts. We're passing the props, name, picture, price, and with coffee, true, things like that. So that's what we're gonna be looking at. And if you see this, the components are already separate. They're already declared separate, right? They're already in its own component. It's not like what we saw before, that this would be somewhere here, right? No, they're already separate. So now the only challenge that I would ask you to do in the activity is that you put these in a different file. So you would see meal.jsx here, dessert.jsx, maybe header.jsx, and then you just import that. And if you use some examples, you could look back at the example from meme on how we imported that. It's more like a file management, what we're gonna do here. Yeah, so that's for that activity. And yeah, so for this one I'll give you 15 minutes because I guess it's a bit more involved for this one. There's 2 parts that I'm asking you to do here. Oh, actually, okay, no, there's only this one, so I'll give you 10 minutes for this one. Okay, cool. I'll see you in 10 minutes. I'm gonna be answering the questions in Slack while you do this one. So once again, fork this one. So click this one, fork it, and then start working on it. So it gets saved in your dashboard. Solutions are here if you wanna check it out. All right, I'll see you in 10 minutes. All right, welcome back. So let's start off by looking at the solutions. Yeah, so the solution was to, okay, let me just fork this so we have this on the side. All right. Yeah, there's that weird behavior by code Sandbox that when if the first time you open it, the files are here, right? But as soon as you fork it, or as soon as you save it, it's gonna be up here. So anyways, just a heads up. I just noticed that. Right, so the solution was to take out everything in this file. Well, most of it, other than the main root component. So in this case, our root component is the menu. The root component, I mean, that is the component that is holding the other components. And if you remember, it's like HTML, right? So it's a structure, it's a hierarchy. So, and you should always have something that is holding the other. So here the root component is the menu that is rendering the other stuff. So that's the only thing that's left here. All the other ones went to their own respective file: dessert, header, meal. And the key thing here is that for each one you have to make sure to import React. It's actually gonna fail if you don't. And you have to export the components, export default meal. I wouldn't go into details on how the import export modules work, but that's how it works for React and ES6. So you export that, and from your main component, your root component, you import those three components that we did. So here it's kind of you could use traversal here, right? So it actually finds it. So that's a nice thing with VS Code. So you can find it there. And you don't need the .jsx here. You just need the name of the file without the file extension. And once you import that, you could use it here. So here we're passing we're rendering these components. We're passing the props, like this one: name, picture, price. And from the component itself, we use that using the notation that we learned before. Since it's an object, we can access its keys. So props.picture, props.name, props.price. Yeah, so that's for chapter 2. Let's go ahead to chapter 3. So now that we know what a component is, we have written some components. We're gonna go into something more of a layout or a pattern for UI, and I'm talking about lists and grids. So if you think of YouTube, Uber Eats, Instagram, Facebook, all of them have some kind of a list or a grid of objects. So just here I'm showing a screenshot of Airbnb. So this is a grid of stuff. Like these are items, and I want you to think about the data model of it. Not in a very complicated way, but just think about it as this is a collection of apartments, right? And each apartment has their properties. This apartment has right now a 4.93 average. That's the name of the apartment. Probably the size of the apartment is somewhere there, and if this apartment is a favorite right now, things like that. So a lot of the things, or basically everything, is representable as an object. Like if you think about Uber Eats, so each of the place has their own. Let me just go there quick. All right, so that's this place, Tim Hortons. That's also a collection of properties. So the name, how long it takes, the price, the address, the rating right now. So all of it, you can think about it as everything is representable into an object with each property. Like even yourself, like myself, I'm an object. I have a name, I have an age, I have an address, and then all of us can be collected into a group of items, a group of objects, like in Facebook. So you could see a list of your friends, and each of those friends have specific properties. So so it's very common to have that kind of interface on how you display lists and grids, and it's actually a very common thing, a very common problem to, or a very common piece of work that you have to do in UI design and UX, is how do you efficiently display a list depending on your product. Right now, the main issue that we have is we're hard coding a lot. So right now we have 3 meals and we're rendering it one by one like that, and we have 3 memes and we're rendering it one by one like that. We're passing props. We're using a component, so we just pass props, so at least we don't have to put the whole iframe here, but still we're rendering it 3 times. And of course, in real life, it's not like that. You know, the data comes from an API or a database, and we don't always have just 3 memes. We might have 4, we might have 5. So we're gonna fix that. But first, we have to learn about some JavaScript array methods, map, filter, and reduce, that are some of the more common ones. So let's say you have an array here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the map, what it does, it transforms each item in your array into a new item, but collects it. The reason that why it's named map is it's mapping every item into another item. So I think it's more clear if I show an example. So here we're mapping each item of this array, 1, 2, 3, 4. Each item is multiplied by 2. So 1, 2, 3, 4 becomes 2, 4, 6, 8. So in map, you always have a 1-to-1 relationship with the input and the output. If you have 4 items in your input, you have 4 items in your output. And you decide what you want to do with each item. Filter, on the other hand, we're looking for particular items. We're filtering the array. So here we're filtering it to the ones that are even, the ones that are divisible by 0, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. The result is 2 and 4. And lastly, reduce. We're reducing, or we're collecting one result for all of these items. In this case, we're adding all of the items in the array. So 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, that's 10, and the code looks like that. So for each item, we're adding it to each other and then returning it. We're gonna use map the most, so make sure you understand map. I have a very simple example here just to kind of like get us started with thinking about lists. It's a very, very, very common concept. A to-do list is like the most popular project that you can do right now, I guess, other than clones of websites. But yeah, so we have an array here of to-dos. Each to-do is an object, right? So that's an object. You have an ID, you have a name for each object. And the way we display that is, first we have to make sure we're interpolating it. And we use map to map each of the array item into JSX elements. So here we're mapping each item in the object here into a list item in HTML. So that's an LI. Right? So we're putting the name there so that it displays in our list. So that's the dot name. We're using the ID as the key, and I'm gonna discuss the key shortly, but just let it sink, this idea that, okay, we're mapping the items of the array, each item into its own list elements, and we're just interpolating it in JSX, right? So each of those items, we're iterating, each item becomes a to-do. So that's the argument variable, and then we're just getting the properties of that to-do that ID and to-do that name. So what we're gonna do right now with our menu app is we're gonna organize it a bit. We're gonna put it in variables. So instead of having something like this, or something like this, we're gonna take out all the props and we're gonna put them in objects. So instead of name equals burger, picture equals that, and then price equals that, we're gonna put them in objects. So it becomes a key value pair. So remembered our objects before. So that's name, picture, and price. And then we're gonna collect all of those into one big array. So now we have an array of objects. So these three objects are from the three declarations before that we have. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna map. So you can probably imagine what happens next. We're gonna map these items into individual rendering of meal component or individual JSX. But first, yeah, where do we put that? So let's say we have an array like this. Where do we store that? Maybe your initial instinct is to, okay, we could put that inside our component, like that. No, that's actually not a good idea, because inside our component, every time this component gets re-rendered, I didn't discuss the re-rendering yet, but just imagine that whenever our data changes, this component would re-render. So every time something happens, a user input or something like that, this array gets redeclared, which doesn't make sense because right now it's a static array, right? It's static. There's nothing dynamic in there. There's no variables in there. So that's not a good place. How about inside the JSX, inside the return? No, it's also not a good place. We actually can't do that. We can't declare a variable in there. We can only interpolate variables. The best place is to put it outside. So you put it before the component, right? So let me open this one. So the best place is to put it outside. So that's your component, the menu component. It goes outside. So it's only declared once for that file. So you don't have to keep redeclaring it. And so now that we have it stored somewhere, we're gonna do the mapping. So like we did in the to-do before. So each of these meals would be transformed into JSX elements. So that's our meals array, meals.map, iterating through each item in that meal, and each meal is mapped into a meal component, a rendering of the meal component. And we're passing the props for each time. So meal.name, meal.picture, meal.price. That didn't really change the way we're doing it before. It's just now it's more organized. We're iterating through something. So whenever this array changes, it's gonna pick it up. It's gonna just be added here. Actually, I'm gonna show that right now. Let's say we add I don't know, pasta. Oh, that doesn't work. Pasta, yeah. All right. Awesome. See, it just gets there because we have the map here. If we didn't have the map here, we would have declared another one like we were doing before. And same thing goes with the desserts. It's just another example there. So there's two ways that you could do that. One way is that you put it directly, like what we're doing here. We're embedding it directly here. But another way is for us to store that into a variable, like in this one. You're storing the mapping first into a variable and then evaluating it inside their JSX. But it's the same thing. It's almost like just copy pasting this part and then putting it there, right? But yeah, usually you're gonna see it in line to save a variable, but you know, once you have a lot of things going on here, you might put that in a function, or you might put it outside. Yeah, so the only problem here is we have a warning. So here we're seeing each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So that is React telling us that, hey, you're missing something in your components, or in the way that you're using the component. So we're missing something here, the way we're using it. So what we're missing is a key prop. So a key prop is used by React to identify the items correctly. So in this case, because we're iterating through something, we have to help React know which one is which. So, and the way to do that is for us to provide React a key. So in this case, we're just going to use the name. As long as it's unique, it's fine. But usually the key would be an ID from the database. Let's say your data is coming from a database, then your ID would be the ID of the item from a database. So we had to put an ID, and we just put that there. It should disappear when we do that, right? Yeah, so that's cool. It disappeared. So that's for that. Rendering, mapping an array of items into components. There's another way. There's another cleanup that we could do here. We could potentially make it even cleaner. So right now the problem is this. So we have 4 props from these 4 attributes, right? From our so we have 3 props. Okay, let's go for the meals. We have 3 props, 3 attributes for our object for meals. So we also have 3 props that we're passing plus 1 for the key. But what if we have more stuff here? Like you have, I don't know, brand, you have other stuff. Let's say you have 10 of them. So it's gonna get a little crowded here. You're gonna have 10 of these there, right? You're gonna have 10 of those and more. So it's not very scalable. One common way to reduce that, to clean that up is to pass the actual item instead. What I mean by that is instead of passing instead of passing each item attribute as a prop, you could just pass the item instead. And from your meal components, then you can access it from the item instead of directly, because now there's an additional level of object there. It's gonna look like this, right? So if you're passing the item as a prop, so the item would be inside the prop. So for you to access those attributes, you have to go one level deeper now instead of just directly. So you have to go props.item.picture to fix that. See? Compared to before, you're doing props.picture because you're passing each one of them. And this is nice because now it doesn't matter how many attributes your meal has or your object has. It doesn't matter. You can have 10 of them. You keep this one line. But from your component, it's up to you how to display it anyway. So you still have to put it. At least it's more declarative in the component itself, which is more specific to what it was doing, which is meal. We're not putting all of the work from the parent. And we're following the single responsibility principle here. So that's one way of doing that. Another way is like we could even clean that up more, which is through the structuring. But I have to discuss the structuring first because it could be a bit confusing. So the structuring is a way that we could break an object and get the inner objects or the inner attributes of an object recursively. So let's say you have an object here. So okay, just simple object, pets with a name and age. Normally we access them by the dot notation, right? So and we assign them to variable. We can assign them to variable like name equals pet.name, age equals pet.age. Good so far. In ES6 we could do something crazy. We could do this. We could get the insides of an object using one line, and you actually get those variables too. So by doing this, const the structure name and age from pet the result is you have a variable name with the value of from the object. You could even go nested. So let's say you have a nested object here. You have a person, JZ, name, age, and you have an object within an object, the person's wife. So normally you do you would get to Beyonce, to the person's wife's name by person.wife.name, but using this structuring, you could do something like this, which is crazy. You could say that I want to get the wife attribute from that object, but from that sub object, for that inner object, I only want the name. You don't care about the age. So the result of this, you're gonna end up with a variable called name. But we're not gonna go that crazy. We're only gonna go like this. It's still a bit manageable. We're gonna destructure wife from person, and we're gonna destructure name from wife. So 2 levels. And whenever you're dealing with this, whenever you see this kind of syntax, just think about it as an object and the object's properties, if it starts to confuse you. So in the cert, we're gonna do something like this. So we're gonna get the item from props, because remember, we're gonna pass it now. We're gonna pass the entire object now. Yeah. So instead of passing each prop every time, each attribute of the item as a prop, we're gonna pass the entire item. So here we have to destructure the attributes of that item. So we had to destructure item from props, and we destructure those 4 things inside the item. And our data didn't change. Our data is still like that, but we just changed the way that we pass the object and how we retrieve it. So the nice thing with this is you don't have to go props.item.picture. You don't have to do that anymore. You could just say picture, name, and price, because we already destructured it. So that's the final kind of solution there. It's a lot cleaner. See, instead of props.items.picture, you just do picture. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for this chapter for list and items. There's some activities here, and for this one, I'm also gonna give you for this one, I'm actually gonna give you more time. I'm gonna give you 15 minutes for this one. All right, so I'll see you in 15 minutes. Hello, welcome back. So, yeah, I realized we only have like half an hour left. So I'm gonna try to discuss chapter 4, like the most important parts, and maybe you could do the activity on your own. But I'm gonna do a quick uh, display of what the solution was for. Oh, it's actually here. So for the memes, let me. You have to pass the meal object as an item prop. So this one, instead of having declaring or rendering each meme manually, we have an array now. So we just iterate through the array using map, and map each meme into a meme component that we render, and then we're passing the meme object here, so that in our meme we access that as item ID and item.title. And for the menu we're passing the item as well. So I think we did the menu before, and in the exercise I think we did the dessert. So we're passing the dessert as an item instead of passing each individual attribute of the dessert object. And then in the desserts we just you don't have to destructure it, but you could have destructured it, but you could access it, process that item, that picture. All right, cool. So we're gonna go straight to chapter 4. By the way, I put a poll in the Slack channel if anyone would be interested in a part 2 where we discuss chapters 5 or whatever's left from chapter 4, whatever we don't finish, chapter 5, chapter 6, and the other ones. And I also have some really good content here in the advanced topics, so we could discuss that if whoever's interested in a part 2. So I put the poll in the Slack, so make sure you respond there if you're interested. So state and effect, right now it's all static, right? We're declaring the memes and the menus all statically. They're just arrays here. They're all arrays, so they're static. We can't change them. But in real life, data should be dynamic. It could be coming from a database or an API, or it could be changed by user input and events. What if I want to add a meme here? What if I want to add a new dessert or a meal here in our menu? So we should be able to add some interactivity, but the way to add interactivity is through state management. So we talked about this before on why you might want to use a framework like React, is that you want to have data-driven components. And the way you have data-driven components is you have data. So you have data that automatically updates the UI whenever something changes. So this is what we use for that. State is where the data lives in the UI. It's used for changing dynamic data. It's not for constants and static variables like this. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put that in state. But if you have static values, don't put it in state, basically. And state is private to the component. So we talked about before on how a component should be self-contained, and the way that it's self-contained is that if a component has a state, it should not leak out. The only way that it should be able to pass that state, that data downwards, is through props. So because the state strictly belongs to that component. If you've done object-oriented programming, it's kind of the same concept. You know, you have a class, and then maybe you have another class that extends that class. So that class has some data, some private methods. So it's private to that class, cannot be accessed by other classes. Kind of like in the same way here, that's the only way that you could share data from a component is through props, and we're gonna see that in this chapter. So the way it works in React is it's a top-down data flow. So imagine that you have you have a state somewhere. Let me see. Okay, so imagine you have your state here, and it flows downwards as props, like a waterfall of props. So each level is a component. So your state is usually on the high up, on the top component, in your somewhere, maybe not necessarily in your root component, but in one of your higher components, or a parent component that would render a child. It would pass some data as props, and then it goes downwards, and then this child would pass props, like we've seen before in our example, the workshop room thing. Yeah, so you can think about state as managed inside the component, like variables inside a class, or specifically private methods inside a class, and props is passed to the component, like parameters passed to a function. We're gonna see an example of that to make it a bit clearer. So we have this example here of an employee and, a boss and an employee, right? So just imagine now in this kind of like a contrived world that, the boss holds the budget. So let's say the company has $300. So don't worry about the syntax for now. Just follow me here. That the company budget is $300, and the boss holds that, and then the boss distributes that $300 to 3 employees. So the boss divides that into 3 employees. So in this case, you have a hierarchy of components. You have a boss and you have employee. In this case, the boss has 3 employees. And in a way, there's no way for the employees to change the value of the budget, because it's the boss who controls the budget. Like, I guess in some companies it's like that. The employees don't have a say. The boss just controls everything. I mean, I know it's not a good working environment if you've seen something like that. But yeah, so that's the analogy here. 300, and then it renders 3 employees. It passes the salary as props, and each one is divided by 3. So your employee component is just it's receiving the props as salary, and it's using that here. It's just putting it in the screen. Salary is 100, 100, 100. So that's kind of an analogy, and remember this syntax, because we're gonna use that after. But that's kind of like the whole analogy there. Another one is like a wine glass tower, kind of like the waterfall. If you think about state, your state is somewhere here. It flows down as props to the other components, and you have other components here, and those components may also have their own state, but they're considering the props from the higher state within their state, so they also pass it down and then downwards up until you reach the root, the leaf component. So yeah, so that's why we need states. Basically, whenever the state changes, we will render the component. So that's the whole point of using a front-end framework. A front-end framework is that we want to have a data-driven components. And a little visit here in our case study. So yeah, just look at this Airbnb page. If I change something, okay, add dates. I don't know. I'm not going on a trip. I can't. No one can right now. And the view changes. See? So you could imagine the state of this app right now, just sitting somewhere on a higher component. Maybe there is a higher app component that holds the state. And whenever you click something, it causes a state change. And it updates the UI. See? You see that update right there? So that's what's happening there, and that's why we need state, because we don't want to manually, select these DOM elements and remove them. That would be a bit too much, especially for modern UIs like this. A little side note: array destructuring. We're gonna use this. So let's say you have an array here of stuff, like what we did before an object, but now it's for an array. You could destructure the items of that array and for each one declaring a variable name. So the result of this statement is that you're gonna have a variable name with a value doggy from the first one. So let's go straight to how do you add state in a component. So in a functional component, you use useState. useState, it's a hook. So it's newish feature of React to use hooks, because before only class components can have state. Now functional components can also have state, making it a lot simpler to do things like this. So now you have a, let's say you have a counter component, and it just updates whenever you click a button. So what you can do is you could add a state. So here you're adding a state called counter using useState, and you destructure the return of that useState, right? So the way useState works is you pass the initial value to it. So since it's a counter, we want to start with 0. So we start with the initial value 0, and the return of the useState is 2 items. It's an array with 2 items. One is the value of the state, or the variable that we want to use to track the state, and the second one is a function used to update the state. So the value of the state and the function to update the state, or we could call the state updater function. And here we could just display the current value of that counter using this. We're interpolating it, remember? And then now we're gonna have something kind of new. We discussed the details of events and event handling and like this on chapter 5, but right now just assume that on click, whenever we click this button, it's an HTML element. We're passing an on click to it, such that whenever you click this button, it's gonna update the state. So I'm just gonna show it. I'm just gonna show it directly so it makes more sense. So we're initializing our counter to 0, and we have our value here, which we're interpolating there. That's the H that you see. That's the one. So that's a header. And then we have a button that when you click the button, it calls a function increment, and in that increment function, we're calling the state updater function that we got from useState. And what we do is we just add 1, so it gets updated. As a result, whenever I click this, see, it gets updated. So what's happening is whenever I click this button, the increment function gets called, and the state updater function is called, passing the old value plus 1, or sorry, passing the current value, which is counter, plus 1. So that works. There's another example here below for class, how you do that with class components, but right now we're gonna focus with functional components. And that's how you, if you've done React before, or if you're curious more on what class components are, you could, that's how they literally map the useState hook. So we're gonna apply that knowledge to our Twitter example. So we have this Twitter thing. Let me just, okay, I'm gonna explain it directly here. So this is a bit more, it's not as contrived as a counter, because it has more, it has some data at least. So here we have some initial tweets and we have some additional tweets. So how it works, this little component, is that in the beginning we're just showing the initial tweets, right? So we're declaring state here using useState. We're passing the initial value of that state to initial tweets, which is this array, right? So in our state, we could put any value. We could put a primitive like a number before, like 0 for counter. We could put an array. You could put an object too. So any value would work here. So, and as before, we're getting 2 items back from the array. We're getting the variable that holds the current value of that state and the state updater function. And what we're doing here is that if I click this button, load more, this thing gets called. So I have it somewhere here on click. loads, function loads, and inside that function, I'm calling the state updater function, tweets that concatenate the additional tweets, which is this one. So it's another array, and we're just combining them. So we're using the state updater function to update the states. So that's the current value of the state, concatenate with the new state. So if I click that, you're gonna see, boom. So now we have that. And then there's another piece of state here, which is the background color used for styling. So we initialize it to white, so that the background right now of this thing is white, right? And we use that to style the div, the main div. So background color is set to the state, which is initialized to white. And when we click change background here, this button right here, we're gonna set the background color to a different color, light green. And we also use the state updater function. So remember, when you use useState, you pass the initial value, you get back the handle to the state, the variable that handles the current value of the state, and a state updater function. So that works. There's a lot of rules here. I'm not gonna go through all of them, but like before, props, and in this case state, you cannot modify them directly. You know, you can do something like go back to the tweets. You cannot do something like tweets equals something like this. You can't do that, right? It actually tells you now that tweets is read only, so you can't do something like that. See, tweets is read only. So if you want to change the state, you have to use the state updater function. There's no other way around it. You have to use it. You cannot use equals like this. Same thing with the props before. We have to treat it as immutable, or we cannot try to modify it. So just be careful with some array methods. Push mutates the original array compared to concat. You could try that later, but just use concat if you're dealing with state. They're similar. It's just the push mutates the original array. So we're using functional components, and we're using hooks. So there's no this, there's no keyword this. You only use the keyword this when you're using class components, but we didn't really discuss that, so I'm gonna skip that. You read the values directly and you use the state updater function. So whenever you use states, okay, let's remove that. How it works is React remembers this value for you. So each time it renders, so if I do this, right, it updated it, but React actually kept the current value, the value with that value of tweets with the new stuff with 4 items. It remembers it. So next time I change the state again, it would continue from that. And we saw that before in the counter example, because in our counter example, sorry, let's just go back a bit. I should have left it open. So the whole point of using state is that React remembers this value. So 1, 2, 3, 4. It remembers its value inside the current scope of your component. It's the current life cycle of your component. So if I click this, so you might be wondering, oh, we're setting it to 0 here, but no, not really. If you use useState, there's some magic in there. React is actually tracking that value. So the next time your component updates or re-renders, it remembers the last value it has been. And for React to do that, to be able to do that, we have to follow some rules when you're using hooks. So you have to use it in top level code. You cannot put it inside an if. You know, a useState, you cannot put inside an if, and you can only put it in a function component. You can't use it in a class component, and you can't put it in a random function. it has to be in a component like this. In a component in React, it starts with a capital letter, so React knows. Or at least if you're using ESLint or something, linting, it's gonna warn you. So just keep those things in mind. Anyways, when you start doing these things, you usually kind of like have a nice example somewhere, so you could use the examples here. See, you get a invalid hook call. Hooks can only be called inside the body of a function component, and ESLint actually warns you with that, with a red squiggly line there. All right, so I'm gonna skip the activity here. We only have 15 minutes, but I really encourage you to like do that after. But this activity, the 4.1, we're adding the meals into a state, kind of like what we did in the tweets example. So we have this initial meals, initial desserts. We put that in our state, and that's it. That's what it's doing. And so, and instead of the meals referencing the static array we declared before outside the component, now it's referencing the state that we used, and that state is initialized to the initial array. Right? We're not changing it yet. That's gonna come after. That's why we have data fetching. So the last thing I think that's really important that I want to cover before we finish is that all of this is nice, but it's still all static. A very common use case for all of you is when you're using an API like a Giphy API, you wanna get data from somewhere. So that's why I added this in the notes when you registered. Is if you can get an API key, that would be really great. But just for example, just to make it faster, we're gonna use my API key. But I'm gonna disable that sometime soon, so make sure you get your own. If you did JavaScript before, you might have done something like XHR to fetch stuff, or you might also be using this right now, the native fetch. But we're gonna use Axios just to make it a bit simpler. How it works is that you send a GET request, and if you don't know what a GET request is or how to fetch data, don't worry, this is gonna come later. But what we're doing is we're getting data from an external API, which is Giphy in this case, and we have to provide an endpoint, a URL. So we're sending a GET request to the URL. We're gonna give the URL after, and then the result, we do something with the result, and we do that using promises. We using .then. Once again, we don't cover promises here, but you could just follow this mini example. So fetch the data. When it arrives, then do something with the result. And you can already imagine what do we do with the result? So in this case, we have a state updater function. So we put it in we use our state updater function to put the results in there. But for us to do that, where do we put this code? So where do we put this Axios code? Do we put it somewhere here? I'm gonna be a spoiler right away. We're gonna put it in an effect. That's the right place to put it. If you try to put it somewhere else, it's either React's gonna warn you, or you're gonna have a really bad bug. So an effect, it's a concept. So an effect or a side effect is anything external to your component. So anything that relates to data fetching because you're fetching something from outside, like from a network. It's not inside your app. Or you're setting a subscription to something. A subscription meaning, let's say you're using a Facebook API, you're subscribing to a list of friends. Or sorry, you're subscribing to the status of a friend being online. You could subscribe to things like that. So whenever that friend becomes online, you get a notification in your app. Things like that. So that's outside of your app because you're using an external service for it. Or you're doing something like manually changing the DOM. It's also outside of the context of React because we're using React to manage our DOM, our data-driven components. If you ever want to do something manual, like manually updating the DOM or something like that, you have to put it in an effect. And the way we do that is you use the use effect hook It's another one of those React hooks. So you call use effect, you put your effect here, whatever you want to do, and then you have a dependency array as a second argument. So the first argument is a function of use effect. The second argument is a dependency array. So the dependency array, it works like this. So here we have a really short example. Like what I said before, let's say you're building a friends book app or something. So let's say you're gonna have a state. You're gonna declare a state. You initialize it to an empty array because your app is just loading. It didn't get the data from friends book yet. So you have that's your friends state, and you have a state of data function set friends. So you want to fetch the data from friends book. So you put in an effect. You do axios.get, and you pass the endpoint of friends book to get the friends, and when it finally arrives, then you do something with the result. So here we're using the state updater to put the result of that fetch into our state. So here set friends result.data. So the empty array would become now filled with whatever you got from friendsbook API. And the name and location, this is the dependency array. So this effect gets called every time these things change. So here, just imagine it right now. Let's say you're in a friends page. Whenever the name changes, or you switch page to a different friend, then you want to run it again. Or if the friend changes location or something like that. In our example though, we're putting an empty array. The empty array means that you only want to run it on load, or on component mount and unmount. And in this case, we're only concerned with the mounting. Mounting means the first time you open the app. So the first time it opens, boom. So when it opens, that's the mount. That's when our component is mounted. Let's do it again. Boom. So it's mounted. So whenever it mounts, your component mounts, we want to fetch the data from Giphy using this endpoint from Giphy. There's some variables there. It's declared there if you want to explore that. And when the data from Giphy API arrive, all the memes that we want, all the memes, we set that to our state. And then again, we have a declaration of, we have a state here, a memes array that we initialize with an empty array. So that works. You could play around with this. You could put dogs, and since it runs on loads, so it actually works when you refresh. Chapter 5, we're gonna have the actual inputs here to be able to change it in the app, not hard-coded like this, because this is very primitive. And if you got an API key from Giphy, like I specified in the notes, make sure you use that here. Like I said, I'm probably gonna disable this anytime soon because I don't want to get. They're gonna think I'm spamming the API. Inspecting the data. So whenever you use APIs like this, make sure you go to the documentation. In this case, go to the Giphy documentation. See the structure of the data. In this case, the data returned by Giphy is, it looks like this. So we have to do data to get the memes. So those are the memes right there. So make sure you look at that, because you might be wondering, oh, I'm using the endpoint here, but I'm not getting the right data that I need, because a lot of the times it comes with so much other stuff. So you have to see exactly which one you need. Play around with that. The last thing I want to talk about is an empty state. So in here, we have this little thing called, that whenever our memes.length is 0, or aka it's empty, we return loading. We want to use something like that, so that when it's still loading, when you have a slow internet, for example, like not everyone in the world has the same internet as you do. Maybe you have fast internet, maybe you have slow internet. So they would see something at least while they're waiting, because this is a network call. It might take time for the data to arrive. And you might have seen something like this in popular UIs. Like in LinkedIn, you see something like that when it's still loading, or Uber Eats, you see something like that. And I'm gonna show you a trick to simulate that if you want to test your empty state UI. So you can go to your DevTools, F12, or right-click Inspect, Network tab, and you could throttle your network or make it slower. Let's say we make it slow 3G. So I'm running in 3G speeds right now, and then I restart. See, it takes so much time to load. No, it's still just called Sandbox loading right now. That's what sucks with running this in Sandbox. Yeah. Oh, see, you see the loading there for like a few seconds. Let's do that again. Hopefully it doesn't load everything like before. See, you see the loading there. If you don't have the loading, what would the user see? The user would see nothing, which is not very good, because you want to give a clue to the user that you're doing something. And what if it lasts for 10 seconds, that blank screen? The user would just have no idea what's going on. Maybe they're just going to leave your website. So it's a good user experience to always have an empty state when you're doing fetch like this. And I'm gonna put back my internet to online so my thing don't crash. But yeah, try those things, and then once again, there's activities here. Try to do them on your own time. We have 5 minutes. If it helps, you could use those 5 minutes for the survey. I posted the link. I'm gonna post it again. There's a few questions on Slack. I'm gonna answer them right now. So if a lot of people are interested in a part 2 of the workshop, we're gonna recap chapter 4, maybe discuss the solutions. Make sure you try to do these things before we start the part 2. We're gonna discuss chapter 5 and chapter 6. Definitely chapter 5 is more on the inputs. Just gonna give you a little preview right now. So we're gonna add some inputs to our meme app, so that so that you could search directly from the app. What else? Yeah, so basically talking about events, because it's a different, it's quite a complex thing even before in plain JavaScript, how you handle these events. You have on change, you have on click. So whenever you have an input, whenever you have an text input like this, how do you catch the events from that, and make it respond to, and allow React to update the state whenever you change the value of those inputs. So basically, user inputs are like those things that you see. Those are HTML inputs, and then the other ones is function props. There is a set. Yeah, there was a question by Stefano on Slack about what is set budget. So actually, yeah, it's gonna come in chapter 6, because like I talked about before, how the data only flows downwards from state downwards to props. But how do we make a change? For sure, there should be a way to do that, right? Because like from the boss and employee example that I gave before, what if the employee wants to contribute to the whole budget thing? So there is a set budget that we're gonna talk about in chapter 6. And you do that using function props. Function props allow you to make data flow up, not just downwards. You do this using callbacks, and we discuss all that. But I'm not gonna spoil too much for those in case we actually decide to have a part 2. Yeah, so I'm gonna stay for like around 15, 20, or even 30 minutes if I get a lot of messages in Slack. I'm gonna hang out for a bit. If you have any questions about anything that was discussed, anything about web, you can ask me, or if you're interested in mentorship, you could message me in Slack. My name in Slack is Lenny. So how it works is you could just so I'm that guy. You could click my picture and send me a message there, right? I mean, I'm gonna send a message to myself if I do that. But if that's you, do that. If you want to send me a direct message, if you want to ask a question. Like I said, I'm also a mentor, so if you're interested in mentoring, yeah, so I'm gonna hang out for a bit and see if anyone has any questions or comments. So yeah, I'm gonna put this screen. I put the survey in Slack. Please do it. It really helps us. It really helps us plan better or improve the workshop, and give me ideas on what are the other topics that would be that we would have a good workshop for. So make sure you respond to the survey. Oops. And yeah, so for those who are leaving, and it's the end of the workshop now, 8:30. So thank you so much for coming. Once again, it's a really tough time right now. So many things happening, and if you live in Canada or States, or basically probably anywhere in the world right now, it's really hard. We can't go out, right? It's really hard to work from home and study from home, and it's been a challenge. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's really hard to focus. I know it's hard to focus and hard to have motivation to do anything nowadays, but you know, it's the first step, you know. It's the first step. Oops. I actually have a picture there. So it's the first step to really learning, right? You just have to like show up, and even if you didn't understand one bit, really thank you for coming. Even if you really struggled with the material, I know it's a lot of content, especially for some of you who have never seen JavaScript or HTML before. It's a lot, but hopefully that inspired you to and show you what you could do. Thanks. Well, yeah, there was a question. I'm gonna answer the question in Slack, but I'm also gonna answer it right now. Will the Notion page remain available after the workshop is over? That's a question from James. Yes, it's gonna be available. So it's gonna be available for an indefinite amount of time. And if ever you lose access or you can't access a certain page, message me on Slack. But the thing is, if we're gonna have a part 2, I might hide some of the part 2 stuff for a while until we have the part 2. Yeah, so anyways, we'll keep you posted. Make sure you're subscribed to SES. I'm also gonna send a message on Slack, but make sure you're subscribed to SES so you could be updated with all the upcoming workshops and events. Yeah.